My name is Michael Amar Calfee. My middle name goes back to the second president of the Republic of Texas. I am a fourth generation native Texan, and my name was handed down to me from several members of my family. My grandmother was the latest before me to have the name. I am not a historian with letters after my name. I am just someone who is curious about the history of Texas you don't often hear about. I'm not trying to tell you everything there is to know about a place or an event. I'm just hoping you will get a taste and then yearn to visit these places yourself to learn more.
Well, here we are again at Fort Griffin, Texas. Now, this isn't just any day for Fort Griffin. This is Fort Griffin Frontier Fort Days. As you can see behind me, we've got tents, we've got people who are going to be offering interpretations and talking about their role or what life was like on the frontier during this time. Just a little bit of information. Fort Griffin was established in 1867. It was part of a bunch of Texas forts that were established after the Civil War for two reasons. Reason number one, of course, was to protect the residents, the settlers, the people moving through the area headed to California. But the second reason, of course, was Reconstruction. Texas had just been on the losing side of a war with the United States, and the first thing you do when you conquer another country, if you will, or people that are in rebellion, is you put military there to keep them in line. And this fort, Fort Richardson, and several others were established in '67 for the purpose of making sure that we weren't going to regroup and launch into hostile activities with the Union again. They did this all over the South. It was part of Reconstruction. And you'd think that, well, the South surrendered, now we're part of the Union again. Well, that wasn't the case. Texas was not readmitted to the Union until 1870. Now, for most of the southern states, what had to happen before that state would be readmitted into the Union, they had to kind of show, some kind of peaceful nature. Sometimes a certain percentage of the male population had to sign an oath of loyalty to the Union. Things like this had to happen. Now remember, it was pretty much martial law right after the Civil War. The military came in, a general was appointed, a Union general was appointed governor of the state of Texas for a time being. In fact, several different generals were. I think even General Griffin might have been one of those generals who was put here for Reconstruction to be over kind of as the military governor for the state of Texas. Now, we're going to see a lot of things today. Right behind me is the fort's well. Now, the well, of course, is a terribly important part of being able to survive on the frontier. A garrison has to have water. Not too far from here, you've got Fort Phantom Hill, which never could have decent water. They had to, their well and their creek would dry up during the summer, and they would have to go miles away with barrels every day to get water to bring back to the troops from the spring they knew about. They dug an 80-foot well there at Fort Phantom Hill, which would go dry. On the other hand, here at Fort Griffin, they had a 40-foot hand-dug well, which was never dry at any point. There's no record of it ever going dry. It's got water in it right now. I can look down in there and see water in it. It's pretty amazing. This fort, the Army really didn't have to work real hard or spend a lot of money for this fort. This fort was in business from 1867 to 1881, which is a long time for a frontier fort. Most of the other frontier forts didn't last near that long. Fort Phantom Hill lasted only 2 years in its location. But one of the reasons that they didn't spend a lot of money is that every building here was pretty much constructed to be temporary. There were 90, maybe a few more than 90 buildings constructed on this fort, but only 6 of them are of stone, more or less permanent construction, and we're going to see every one of those here today. But only 6 of them were of stone. So anyway, we're going to mosey around here. We're going to see some pretty cool stuff. We're going to see people talking about this fort, and we're going to look at the kind of structures that they had. Now, I'll go ahead and say it. There's not a lot of, look around here even now, there's not a lot of lumber, not a lot of good large oak trees or things of that nature. What they would do is they would take relatively soft wood, mesquite, things like that, and they would split it into boards and instantly build a shelter out of it. Well, unseasoned wood will shrink, and it would shrink and have gaps in it, and you're going to get to see that on some of these structures. So let's move along and see what we can see. Okay, this is an example of what buildings, most of the buildings, might have looked like at Fort Griffin through most of its lifetime. As you can see through the walls, all right? That's because these buildings were built with green wood. That is to say, they took the wood, they milled it, and they put it up. And green wood that was growing yesterday, put up, will shrink as it dries out. And as it does, you see it gets these gaps in it, it splits, it does all kinds of things. This was common. There were, in its heyday, as many as 90 buildings on Fort Griffin, but only 6 of them were made to be permanent stone structures. And the ruins of most of those are here today, and we'll see them. But this is what the buildings look like. They were this kind of put up, almost picket type of construction. Not quite, but the picket type construction is more like like log cabins type stuff stacked on end. You dig a trench, you stick a post in, you put another one beside it, you go on, and you nail them together on the inside. And they're more like log cabins. But this is actually planks that they would mill. But as you can see, they weren't made to last, weren't made to be permanent structures. And that's true for a lot of Fort Griffin. They didn't spend a lot of time working on the structures or the post or anything like that. The Army really got its money's worth out of Fort Griffin because they used it for like a sub post. They used it for all kinds of things. That McKenzie up at Fort Richardson would launch campaigns towards the Comanches and use Fort Griffin as kind of a staging area or something like that. Man, the Army didn't spend a lot of money on this post, but it was in operation from 1867 to 1881. And a lot of that has to do with the economics of the area that I'll talk about later. Many of the frontier posts in Texas were occupied or staffed, I guess you could say, by the former slave regiments of the new Union Army, known as Buffalo Soldiers. It's the Native Americans who call them that. And they served quite well, quite valiantly, and did a whole lot for the advancement of the western frontier in the United States. Some of the forts we visit don't hardly have any artifacts. Fort Griffin here has several, have some really neat things that I'll share with you in a minute. One woman went to town one day and had her picture made. Not only does she have the diary entry, not only do we have the diary entry of when she did that, we have a copy of the photo. How real is that?
Lodges and clothing items.
The Comanche and the Kiowa people used about every part of the buffalo that you can think of, from the horn all the way to its hoof.
As a young America pushed west, settlers came to the grassy lands, intending to establish farms and ranches. It would be a good place to raise.
One of the things I like about these state parks, is the fact that they tend to give more of the Native Americans' perspective and not just the settlers and the soldiers and things like that. But they talk a lot about the natives and what they did and how they did it and stuff like that. They give time to that. And when you come here, you can hear their story and see more of what we're talking about. Not unusual for a buffalo hunter, one guy, to kill 100 buffalo a day. He would have wagons of people that could haul the hides and would do the skinning and doing all that type of stuff, and would come back here. Here, in the town down below, the hides would be inspected and graded, and then shipped off by hide dealers to back east and things like that. And because, though, there was this big industry going on, and a lot of people were making money off that industry, then, of course, the town had to have its own stores. Okay, we got two things going on right here. One, this is an example of the four-man barracks that you would have seen at Fort Griffin. They're made out of this green wood, kind of put together like we talked about at the mess hall, and it would shrink up, and these were not supposed to be permanent structures. And what's going on here is these guys are working on it, trying to keep it from falling down, which would have been a common thing to be going on at Fort Griffin all the time, okay? And these barracks would be put up, and then they would be okay for a couple of years, and they'd be patching the insides, and then somebody would have to work on them. Now, one of the commanders of this post spent a little bit of money in the beginning and got some carpenters and some stonemasons here to do some building, but like I said, only 6 buildings really ended up being permanent structures. The rest of them were like this. Now, if you'll pan just a little bit that way, okay, you'll see the parade field. The parade field is the central part of any army post. Even today, there'll be a great big field out in the middle. This field here was where they did a lot of their training, their marching, and who knows what all else as far as their daily activities that they would do. This was the flagpole. This is a big deal. They would raise the flag every morning and sound retreat and put it down every evening. And all the buildings were built around this big area. And a few of the permanent structures that we'll see as we move about are still there, and we'll enjoy seeing those ruins. But this was the big deal. Those 90 buildings that I was telling you about that occupied this post were all the way around the parade field. That's pretty much what they did. They were just building after building after building. There were dozens or more of these barracks that you see here that these guys were working on. So that's kind of a start about the buildings that were at Fort Griffin. Let's move on. Okay, well, I'm standing in front of the post administration headquarters building. It's one of the 6 structures that was made out of stone out of the 90 plus buildings that were on this post that has survived all these years, at least to some degree. This would have been the headquarters. The commanding general and his adjutant would have worked out of this building. As typical of so many military posts, this sits at the end of the parade ground. And if Judy will simply pan back around here, you'll see the middle of the parade ground, and you'll see the flag, and we'll come back to me. There we go. Yeah, and this is just one of the few buildings that has survived all these years. All the people who were here. And these cattle are all as much of a pedigree longhorn as you can have a longhorn to be.
Yeah.
Because I mean, longhorn's kind of it's not really a pedigree type of.
Yeah, these cattle were gathered up in the 30s from ranches that were known to have had cattle since the time of the trail drives. And that's the only place we've gone back to for bloodlines.
Yeah.
Is known bloodlines that existed, from
Yeah,
the time
yeah,
of the trail drives.
and your mission here is really to protect the bloodline.
That's right.
That's really it. Well, that's pretty neat. And these guys seem to be enjoying it. Stars here.
It is siesta time.
It
which,
is.
Interestingly enough, the Spanish supposedly got their tradition of the siesta, the early afternoon nap, from watching the cat.
What's your name?
My name is Gilbert Tafoya Hernandez. I'm a descendant of Santiago Tafoya, which came to this territory in the 1850s. In the 1850s.
Hang on, I'll get that. Keep talking.
There's an understanding that great-granddad was very, very understanding of the countryside here as a Union soldier, Confederate soldier, and a civil service hire working with the camel experiment of the 1850s, 1860s. Understanding where granddad came from, ran away from New Mexico, which is now Taos in that area, went to Baltimore, Maryland at the age of 11, worked helping all the politicians, retrieving newspapers, ordering stuff for them, delivering stuff for them. Granddad was pretty healthy in the respect that he wanted to make an honest living.
Well, as always, what building is it that gets to survive for 150 years or more? Yep, the powder magazine. Here's the powder magazine for Fort Griffin. Now, the neat thing about Fort Griffin powder magazine, unlike some of the others we've seen so far, is that they have actual ordnance type stuff in it. Come in here and show this. Hi, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that historical video. You know, these video things that on YouTube, we live and die by the likes that we get. Be sure, please, to hit that like button and take your time to do that. You don't know how much it means. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.